The studio lights felt different that night. Colder, somehow. I remember sitting in the green room, watching the monitor as they counted down to the segment, and thinking about how 12 years can turn a hero into a villain with just a few words. My name is Sarah Colton, and in 2013, I tried to kill my husband. I'm not going to soften that for you. I put something in his coffee that should have stopped his heart. It didn't work the way I planned, and he survived, and I went to prison for 6 years. But here's what everyone wanted to know then, and what they still whisper about now. Was I protecting my daughter, or was I a monster who couldn't accept losing a custody battle? Tonight, on the evening news, they were going to tell you their version. They were going to sit behind that desk with their perfect hair and their serious faces and pick apart every piece of my story. Every contradiction, every moment that didn't quite add up. And I was going to have to sit there and let them, because I agreed to this interview. Because somewhere deep down, I thought maybe, just maybe, the truth still mattered. But the truth is complicated. The truth has layers that don't fit neatly into a news segment. And 12 years ago, when I looked into my 7-year-old daughter Emma's eyes and saw something broken there, something that hadn't been broken before her weekend visits with her father started, I stopped caring about proof. I stopped caring about evidence. I cared about justice. That's what I told them at my trial. That's what I told the police when they found me standing over Marcus's hospital bed, crying so hard I could barely breathe. I did it for justice, I said. For what he did to Emma. The problem was, Emma wouldn't talk. She wouldn't tell anyone what happened. Not the therapist, not the social worker, not the gentle police officer who came to our house with the teddy bear and the kind smile. She just stared at walls and wet the bed and stopped eating anything that wasn't plain crackers. She was 7 years old, and something had carved out a piece of her soul, and I knew it was him. I knew it was Marcus. But knowing isn't proving. And in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of everyone who judged me then and judges me now, I was just a bitter ex-wife who couldn't handle joint custody. A woman who coached her daughter into silence. A woman who invented a monster to excuse attempted murder. The television anchor looked straight into the camera as the segment began. Her name was Victoria Chen, and she'd built her career on these kinds of stories. The ones that seemed simple on the surface but had teeth underneath. 12 years ago, she said, her voice steady and measured, Sarah Colton became a household name when she admitted to poisoning her ex-husband, Marcus Colton, with antifreeze mixed into his morning coffee. She claimed she was protecting their daughter Emma from abuse, but Marcus Colton denied everything. No charges were ever filed against him. No evidence was ever found. And tonight, we've uncovered documents that raise disturbing questions about Sarah's story. I felt my stomach drop as I watched from the green room. Documents? What documents? Victoria continued. We've obtained therapy records, school reports, and interviews with people close to the family that paint a very different picture of what happened in 2013. Was Sarah Colton a protective mother driven to desperation? Or was she something far more calculating? The segment cut to BRL footage. Old news clips from my trial. Photos of Marcus looking pale and weak in his hospital bed. Photos of Emma as a child, her face blurred out now to protect her privacy. Though that felt like closing the barn door after the horses had already trampled everything. Then they showed him. Marcus, today. Older, grayer, but with that same calm, reasonable expression he'd always worn like a mask. He sat in an expensive-looking office, hands folded on the desk in front of him. I've spent 12 years living with what Sarah did, he said, his voice soft, almost wounded. But worse than that, I've spent 12 years separated from my daughter. Emma refuses to see me. She won't take my calls. And I think that's because her mother spent years poisoning her mind against me, just like she poisoned my body. The camera stayed on his face. He looked down, as if composing himself, as if fighting back emotion. I never touched Emma inappropriately, he said. Never. The idea that I would harm my own child is beyond comprehension. But Sarah couldn't accept that our marriage was over. She couldn't accept that I'd moved on, that I was happy with someone else. So she created this narrative, and an innocent child paid the price. I wanted to throw something at the monitor. I wanted to scream, but I just sat there, hands clenched in my lap, because I knew my turn was coming. I knew they were building the case against me first, making sure the audience was properly primed to doubt everything I said. Victoria's voice came back over the footage. We spoke with Dr. Helen Morehouse, the therapist who evaluated Emma Colton in 2013, just weeks before Sarah's arrest. The screen showed an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, sitting in what looked like a home office. I saw Emma 3 times, Dr. Morehouse said. Sarah brought her in claiming the child had been sexually abused during visits with her father. But in my professional opinion, Emma's behavior was consistent with parental alienation syndrome, not abuse. She was anxious, yes. Withdrawn, yes. But these are also classic signs of a child being coached, being told that one parent is dangerous. Children in high-conflict divorces often exhibit these exact symptoms. Did you see any evidence of sexual abuse? Victoria asked off-camera. No physical evidence, no doctor. Morehouse said carefully, and more importantly, Emma never disclosed any abuse. Even in play therapy, using anatomically correct dolls, which we did in our final session, she showed no signs of traumatic sexualization. If something had happened, we typically see very specific behavioral indicators. Those weren't present. The segment moved on, but those words echoed in my head. No signs, no disclosure. I'd heard it all before, at the trial, but hearing it again, presented like this, made it sound so damning, so clear-cut. Except it wasn't clear-cut at all. What Dr. Morehouse didn't mention, what they conveniently left out of this neat little package, was that Emma had screamed when the anatomically correct dolls were brought out. She'd thrown them across the room and hidden under the desk, hyperventilating. Dr. Morehouse had written in her notes that this was an overreaction consistent with coaching, as if a genuinely traumatized child would calmly demonstrate what happened to them with dolls. As if trauma worked that way, Victoria appeared on screen again, standing now, walking through what looked like a suburban neighborhood. I recognized it immediately. My old street. The house where Marcus and I had lived together, where Emma had taken her first steps, where everything had fallen apart. We also spoke with neighbors who knew the Colton family, Victoria said, and their accounts raise even more questions about Sarah's version of events. A woman appeared on screen. Janet Richardson, 3 houses down. We'd never been close, but she'd always smiled at Emma, always waved from her driveway. Sarah seemed obsessed with the custody arrangement, Janet said, shaking her head. I remember her coming to my house once, asking if I'd ever seen anything strange when Marcus picked up Emma. Asking if I'd heard anything. She wanted me to testify that Marcus was dangerous, but I'd never seen anything like that. He seemed like a good father, very involved. Another neighbor, an older man named George. There was definitely tension. You could feel it whenever Sarah and Marcus were in the same place. She couldn't stand that he'd remarried. His new wife Diane, she was younger, more easygoing. I think that ate at Sarah. The segment was building its case, brick by brick. The bitter the coached child, the baseless accusations, and then Victoria dropped the bomb I'd been dreading. But perhaps most troubling, she said, her voice dropping to that serious register that meant a revelation was coming, are the emails we've obtained through a Freedom of Information request. Emails that Sarah sent to her lawyer in the weeks before she attempted to kill Marcus Colton. The screen showed printed emails, with my name at the top, dates from March 2013. Victoria read them aloud. In one email, Sarah writes, "If the courts won't protect Emma, I'll have to find another way. I can't let him keep hurting her, even if no one believes me." In another, dated just 5 days before the poisoning, I've been researching options. Sometimes the system fails, and mothers have to take justice into their own hands. My lawyer at the time, Patricia Hendricks, appeared on screen. She looked older too, more tired. When Sarah sent those emails, I was deeply concerned. I advised her that any action outside the legal system would not only be illegal, but would also harm her custody case. But she seemed determined. She seemed to believe she was running out of time. Victoria turned to face the camera directly. So the question becomes, was Sarah Colton planning murder as a last resort to protect her daughter? Or was she planning murder because she was about to lose primary custody, and this was her way of making sure Marcus could never have Emma at all? They cut to commercial, and a production assistant came to get me. "You're up after the break. Ms. Colton ready?" I wasn't ready. I'd never be ready. But I stood up anyway and followed her down the hallway toward the studio, toward the lights, toward Victoria Chen and her perfectly practiced sympathy. The set was smaller in person than it looked on television. Victoria sat across from me, and up close, I could see the makeup caked into the fine lines around her eyes, the tightness in her smile that suggested this was a performance, not a conversation. "Sarah," she began, once we were live again, "thank you for agreeing to speak with us tonight. I know this can't be easy." "It's not," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "But I'm here because the truth matters, even if it's complicated." "Let's start with the most important question," Victoria said. "Did Marcus Colton sexually abuse your daughter Emma?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I believe he did." "You believe he did? But you don't know." "I know what I saw," I said. "I know that my happy, outgoing 7-year-old turned into a shell of herself after unsupervised visits started. I know she couldn't sleep. I know she started having accidents. I know she begged me, crying not to make her go to his house. Those are the things I know." But Dr. Morehouse said those behaviors could be explained by parental alienation. That you might have been, consciously or unconsciously, turning Emma against her father. I took a breath. Dr. Morehouse saw Emma 3 times. 3 hours total. I lived with Emma every day. I watched my child disappear. And yes, she threw the dolls across the room. Not because I coached her to do it, but because those dolls terrified her. Because they reminded her of something she was trying desperately to forget. Victoria leaned forward slightly. "But Emma never said Marcus abused her. Not once. Why do you think that is?" "Because she was 7, I said, and I could hear my voice starting to shake. "Because she was scared. Because abusers are very good at making children believe that telling will make things worse. Marcus was her father. She loved him. That's what makes this kind of abuse so devastating. Children don't have the language for it. They don't even have the understanding of what's happening to them. They just know something is wrong, something hurts, and the person who's supposed to protect them is the one causing the pain." "Let's talk about those emails," Victoria said, smoothly shifting gears. "You wrote to your lawyer about taking justice into your own hands. That sounds premeditated." "It was," I said, and I saw her eyebrows raise slightly. She hadn't expected me to admit it. "I spent weeks thinking about it. Weeks researching, planning. Because I had taken Emma to doctors, therapists, social workers, I'd called the police. I'd filed motions with the court. And nothing happened. Nothing changed. The system that was supposed to protect her just kept sending her back to him. Over and over again, and every time she came home more broken." "So you decided to kill him?" "I decided that if the law wouldn't stop him, I would." Victoria paused, letting that hang in the air. Then she played her next card. "Sarah, we spoke with Emma. She's 19 now, an adult. She agreed to give us a statement." My heart stopped. Emma had agreed to talk to them. Emma, who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, who'd cut off all contact after her 18th birthday, who blamed me for everything that had happened. The screen showed text, not video. They were protecting her identity, at least, but the words were there, and Victoria read them aloud. Emma says, and I quote, "I don't remember my father ever hurting me. I remember being scared during the custody battle, but I think that was because my mom was scared. She was always tense. always asking me questions about my visits with Dad. I felt like I had to say something was wrong to make her happy. But nothing was wrong. My father never touched me. My mother destroyed our family over something that never happened. The studio was silent except for the hum of equipment. I felt like I'd been gutted. "Sarah," Victoria said, softer now, "that's your daughter." Saying nothing happened. I couldn't speak for a moment. When I finally did, my voice was barely a whisper. "Emma's memories from that time are fragmented. She's said that before. 2 therapists. Trauma does that to children. It creates gaps, false memories, or blocks things out entirely. The brain protects itself." "Or," Victoria said, "there was nothing to remember." "No," I said, and suddenly I was angry. Suddenly, I was done playing defense. "No. You want to know what really happened? I'll tell you what really happened." I leaned forward, looking directly into the camera, imagining all those people at home, all those people who'd already decided I was guilty, already decided I was the monster. "Marcus was careful," I said. "He was so careful. He never left marks. He never did anything where witnesses could see. But there were things, small things, that I noticed before Emma stopped talking altogether. She would flinch when he hugged her. She started drawing pictures at school that worried her teacher, pictures of a little girl locked in a closet. When I asked her about them, she said Daddy told her that's where bad girls go who tell secrets." Victoria interrupted. "We spoke with Emma's 2nd grade teacher. She said those pictures were part of a lesson about feelings, and that many children drew similar things. Then let me tell you about the underwear," I said. And I saw Victoria's composure flicker for just a second. 3 pairs of Emma's underwear went missing after a weekend visit. When I asked Marcus about them, he said Emma must have lost them at his house, that he'd looked but couldn't find them. What 7-year-old loses 3 pairs of underwear? "Children lose things all the time," Victoria said, but her voice was less certain now. "And the nightmares. She started having nightmares where she'd wake up screaming about monsters in her bed. When I asked her what the monster looked like, she described her father's cologne. That specific smell? She said the monster smelled like Daddy." "Dreams are not evidence," Victoria said. "I know that," I snapped. "Don't you think I know that?" I knew I had nothing that would stand up in court. Nothing concrete. Nothing a jury could see and say, "Yes, that proves it." That's why I did what I did. Because in the absence of proof, in the absence of justice, I chose my daughter's safety over everything else. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "But what if you were wrong? What if Marcus never hurt Emma, and you destroyed 3 lives, including your daughter's, over a mistake?" "Then I'm a monster," I said simply. But I don't believe I was wrong. I believe the system failed us. I believe there are predators who know exactly how to operate within the system, how to appear perfect, how to make the mother look crazy. And I believe my daughter, who is 19 and traumatized and has convinced herself that forgetting is easier than remembering, is lying to herself to survive. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, but that was the core of it. Victoria brought up more neighbors, more experts, more people willing to say I was delusional or vindictive, or both. She played clips of Marcus talking about how he'd forgiven me, how he just wanted his daughter back, how he prayed every day that Emma would see through the lies I'd told her. And then, just as we were wrapping up, just as Victoria was delivering her closing statement about how complex these cases are, and how we may never know the real truth, something happened. A production assistant rushed onto the set, whispering urgently to Victoria. I saw the anchor's face change, saw the careful neutrality crack. "We're getting word," Victoria said, one hand to her earpiece, "that there's been a development in this case. We're going to take a brief break and come back with breaking news." The cameras cut, and suddenly everyone was moving, talking, looking at phones. I sat there, confused, as Victoria stood up and walked away, still listening to her earpiece. A different producer came over to me. "Ms. Colton, you need to see this." She handed me a tablet. On the screen was a news article, posted just minutes ago. The headline made my blood run cold. Marcus Colton arrested on charges of child sexual abuse, material possession. I read the article 3 times, my hands shaking. Police had executed a search warrant on Marcus's home that morning, following a tip from an anonymous source. They'd found hundreds of images on a hidden hard drive in his office. Not just images. Videos. Some dating back more than a decade. They hadn't found anything involving Emma. Not yet. But there were other children. Children whose faces investigators were working to identify. Children whose parents had no idea what had happened to them. The producer was talking to me, saying something about going back on air, about getting my reaction, but I couldn't hear her over the roaring in my ears. I'd been right, and everyone had called me crazy. But I'd also been wrong, in a way that made me feel sick, because if there were hundreds of images, if Marcus had been doing this for years, if there were other victims, then I hadn't stopped him at all. I'd tried to kill him and failed, and he'd gone on for 12 more years. 12 more years of other children, other families, other lives destroyed. We went back on air. Victoria's face was serious, almost gray. "We've just learned," she said, "that Marcus Colton was arrested this morning on federal charges related to child sexual abuse material. We want to be clear, these charges do not confirm that he abused his daughter Emma. They do not prove that Sarah Colton's accusations from 12 years ago were accurate, but they do raise serious questions about the man who has maintained his innocence for over a decade." She turned to me. "Sarah, I have to ask, did you know about this? Did you have anything to do with this arrest?" "No," I said, and my voice sounded strange, distant. "I had no idea. But I'm not surprised." "What do you mean?" "I mean that predators don't stop," I said. "They don't hurt one child and then walk away. It's a pattern, an addiction. I always knew there had to be others. I just couldn't prove it." Victoria looked at the camera. "We'll continue to follow this developing story. Marcus Colton is being held without bail pending a detention hearing. The FBI is asking anyone with information to contact their tip line." The segment ended. The lights came down. And I sat there in that chair, feeling nothing and everything at once. A week later, I got a letter. It came to my apartment, forwarded through my lawyer, because Emma didn't have my address. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope immediately. Inside was a single page, written in that same careful script. "Mom," it said, "I saw the news. I've been thinking about things I told myself I didn't remember. Things I convinced myself never happened because it was easier that way. I need time. I need to figure out what's real and what I made myself forget. But I want you to know that I understand now why you did what you did. I'm not ready to see you yet. But maybe someday. Maybe when I've sorted through all of this, we can talk. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't believe you, Emma." I read that letter 100 times. I kept it folded in my pocket, took it out whenever I felt like I was drowning, which was most days. The trial came 3 months later. Marcus pled guilty to avoid the details being made public, but they came out anyway. Reporters dug through court documents. Victims started coming forward. Parents who'd let their children spend time with Marcus, who'd trusted him, who'd had no idea. None of them were Emma. The FBI looked, examined every file, every image, every video. They never found anything involving her specifically. And I don't know if that means he never documented what he did to her, or if he was smarter than that, or if maybe, just maybe, I really had been wrong about Emma and right about Marcus in a different, equally horrifying way. What I do know is this: I spent 6 years in prison for attempted murder. I lost my daughter for 12 years. I was called crazy, vindictive, dangerous. I was held up as an example of how bitter ex-wives weaponize abuse allegations. And I was right. Not perfectly right. Not provably right. But right enough that a monster is now in prison. Right enough that some children are safer than they would have been. Right enough that maybe, eventually, Emma will remember and heal. Victoria Chen never apologized for the way that segment painted me. But she did do a follow-up, 6 months later, about how the system fails to believe mothers, about how abusers manipulate investigations, about how many children fall through the cracks because we demand perfect proof of imperfect crimes. She called it the Colton case. When justice comes too late. I didn't watch it. I spend my days now working at a domestic violence shelter, helping other women navigate custody battles, divorce proceedings, protective orders. I tell them to document everything. I tell them to trust their instincts. I tell them that sometimes doing the right thing means sacrificing everything, and you still might lose. But I also tell them this: the truth has a way of surfacing, eventually. It might take 12 years. It might take longer. But predators make mistakes. They get confident. They think they're untouchable. And when they fall hard. Emma and I talk now, sometimes brief phone calls every few weeks. She's in therapy, working through memories that are coming back in pieces, in fragments, in nightmares that wake her up, crying. She says she doesn't know yet what's real and what her mind invented to protect itself. She says she might never know for certain. But last week, she said something that made me cry so hard I had to pull my car over. She said, "Mom, I think you saved me. Not from what happened, because it already happened, but from years more of it. From becoming one of those images they found, and I'm starting to understand that you chose to be the villain so I could be safe. That's not nothing. That's not nothing." I repeat those words to myself on the hard days, the days when I think about how I could have done things differently, how I could have found proof, how I could have made someone listen. The days when I wonder if poison was really the only answer, or if I just wanted it to be because rage felt better than helplessness. The system that was supposed to protect my daughter failed her completely, and 12 years later, when the evening news questioned my story, they were asking the wrong question. They were asking, was Sarah Colton telling the truth? The question they should have asked was, why didn't anyone believe her?
Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent isn't protecting your child from the world. It's living with the knowledge that you tried everything the right way, followed every rule, trusted every system designed to help, and it all failed. Sarah Colton's story isn't just about one mother's desperate choice. It's about how many times we dismiss a mother's instinct because we can't see the bruises, how many children suffer in silence because predators have learned exactly what to say, exactly how to act, exactly how to make the victim look like the crazy one. 12 years. That's how long it took for the truth to surface. 12 years of people calling Sarah a liar, a manipulator, a woman scorned. And in those 12 years, how many other children paid the price for our collective refusal to believe what couldn't be proven in a courtroom? I hope you never have to make the choice Sarah made. I hope you never have to decide between doing what's legal and doing what's right. But if there's anything to take away from this story, it's this. Believe the mothers who are screaming into the void. Believe the children who can't find the words. And understand that sometimes justice doesn't show up when you need it. It shows up when it's ready, and by then, the damage is already done. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you angry or sad or grateful that this wasn't your life, do me a favor. Drop a comment below and tell me what you're feeling right now. Tell me if you've ever been in a situation where you had to trust your gut even when everyone said you were wrong. Your voice matters, and I read every single comment. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, complicated stories about people facing impossible choices, hit that subscribe button. Because the truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth hearing. Thanks for listening. Take care of each other out there.